The following program is to provide entertainment and information. It is not considered to be any legal or investment advice.
Good morning, appraisers. Let's talk some real estate. You're listening to the Voice of Appraisal, the #1 appraisal podcast in America that always brings you the latest news and information from the front lines of the real estate market. Anything from market conditions, appraisal regulations, cryptocurrencies, big bank news. Folks, you have a question, we have all of your answers. We are the one-stop source for all of your real estate appraisal information needs. If you want to be in the know, you have definitely tuned in to the right show. I'm your host, Phil Crawford. Happy to have all of you here with us today. Happy New Year. Kevin, how you doing, my friend?
Happy New Year to everyone. Now you can quit the emails.
Yes.
We're back. We
just
had to take a little bit of break there because Phil is just totally swamped.
I'm swamped. I came back to a big pile of work. I got a little bit of a head cold when we were on vacation, a little bit of a sniffle because I was on one of the airplanes. Of course, everybody on an airplane is sniffling and sneezing. It's just bad, but we're doing good. It's been a very profitable and exciting year so far. We're only like 15 days, 16 days into the year.
Right.
We got a lot to discuss. So much happened when we were gone.
No, I thought that you said you had a cold. I thought you got hit by the bifurcation.
No, the bifurcation. We're going to talk about bifurcation today and all of the different types of modernization that's going on. We have a lot of stuff to go over. First of all, I want to go over the Crawford Report. If you got it for December 2019, look at some of the headlines that are inside the Crawford Report. I want to hit this really quick. Obviously, the repo issue in 2019 is making major headlines. It's starting to move its way more and more into mainstream topics, and people are just really discussing this whole repo. They're calling it quantitative easing 4, non-QE, all of this stuff. Of course, we've got the federal balance sheet increasing over $4 trillion again. People are out there saying, hey, look, if the market crashes next time, blame the Fed. That's who you need to blame, because guess what? They're not going to blame us. They're not going to blame the real estate appraisers the next time this whole thing goes south, and that's because we are well disclosed. If you take a look at the Crawford Report, for those of you that get it through Find My Appraiser and the FindMyAppraiser.com network, we are now starting to put a summary of the Crawford Report in there for all the FMA people, and you will be properly disclosed if something goes south with the economy. If you appraise a piece of property and it's appraised at $250,000 today, which is your effective date, and 6 months later something happens, a liquidity crisis happens, liquidity freezes up, banking system has trouble, that property that was worth $250 today is now worth $210, don't come at me with some repurchase offer saying I didn't do it right because I fully disclosed the entire macroeconomic picture of the country. And believe it or not, macroeconomics have a lot to do with the value of those homes, especially when it comes to interest rates, negative interest rates, and interest rates fluctuating up and down. Folks, it's not just me who's going crazy about this economy. It's everybody. It's people like Jeffrey Gundlach. He's one of my favorite. Jeffrey Gundlach. He's out there going, negative interest rates, ridiculous. Jim Rogers, negative interest rate, ridiculous. Stanley Druckenmiller, he was on a Bloomberg interview in December of last year, basically out there going, I have no idea what the Federal Reserve is doing. It's like they're a bunch of clowns, for crying out loud. Everything has to do with monetary policy, with the Federal Reserve Bank, banks throughout the world, and you're not going to put it on us when something goes wrong in the economy. As real estate appraisers, what do? We produce credible opinions of value, but we also produce research papers. We research and we provide the data and analysis that backs up our opinions, and we're going to back it up more and more this year when it comes to macroeconomic issues, and we're going to do that in the Crawford Report. So if you are an FMA or FindMyAppraiser.com appraiser, we will be adding that in. What you're seeing in the FMA comments is basically what I put into commercial reports. I use this data and information when it comes to the development of capitalization rates, the history of a certain cap rate on a certain commercial piece of property, the history of a gross rent multiplier. Why is your GRM today at 145? When 3 years ago it was at 115, what the hell is going on? That's the big question we got to ask ourselves. In the future, the appraiser of the 21st century is an appraiser that answers the question why. It's always what is the problem with appraisers? That's the number one question. But number two is after you solve the problem, you have to give the answer as to why. Why is the cap rate at 5.5% when it was at 9% 3 years ago? Why? Does that increase my risk? If so, why? Why is the GRM at this? Does it increase the risk? Why? Remember, capitalization rates and GRMs are all about the risk. And we're going to talk a lot about that today in today's show. You have to be able to answer these questions why. And some of this macroeconomic data specifically answers the reason why some of those rates and some of those GRMs are where they are today. Also, this is excellent analysis to put inside of your ERC reports, your employee relocation assignments. Employees that are getting transferred want to know what the appraiser is looking at, and they want to know if their appraiser has their thumb on everything that's going on, both macro and micro, inside of their marketing area and the overall economy. So that will be a big push and a big goal for us through 2020 through the FMA network as we continue to modernize. Appraisers are going to modernize, and we will become a totally different type of appraiser in the 21st century. There are two paths. There are two paths now to modernization. I have found this out recently. I couldn't put my finger on it until Kevin, the Burly Kentuckian, Brian Reynolds, with Appraiser e-learning, put on a webinar entitled The Appraisal Webinar, The Future of Appraisals. And on this webinar, we had the Burly Kentuckian, Brian Reynolds. We also had George Dell, and we had the bifurcating lady of class. And all three of them were on the webinar discussing about the future of the appraisal profession. Now, let me tell you something right now. I'm just going to get this out there so everybody understands it. I don't have a problem with bifurcation. I don't have a problem with classy ladies. I don't have a problem bifurcating with classy ladies. I don't have a problem with any of this stuff as long as the scope of work of the assignment matches the bifurcation. But bifurcation should not be the end-all, be-all, the single product, the number one product that is used by Fannie Mae and by Freddie Mac when I see all of these macroeconomic headlines out there, where the repo market has $80 billion pumped into it every single night to ensure liquidity in the banking system, where the Federal Reserve comes in and buys up mortgage-backed securities, but no one purchases them. They keep them on their balance sheet because they may not be worth anything. Are these the times in economic history where we need to look at this form of modernization known as bifurcation? I think the answer is no. I think if you take a look at macroeconomic issues today, this is not the time to bifurcate. It's not the time to bifurcate across the entire spectrum. Do it during portfolio acquisitions. Do it if you want to have a low LTV loan where the risk is lower, but not like this. No, no, no. Classy bifurcation may not be the way to go. So Brian with George Dell and the Lady of Class really teach us something in this webinar. This webinar is so important and so deep, they don't even understand what they said. We will break that down for you right now. So here's the thing. I'm going to give you some highlights from this webinar. Number one, we had reported last year that some of the pilot programs that Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac were putting out, they were shelved. They were on hold. Well, guess what? The classy lady has something to say about that. Let's see what the classy lady has to say about the pilot programs at Fannie Mae.
Tim asked a question. FHFA has put the brakes on the bifurcation process to some extent.
The brakes.
Any thoughts on this potential backpedaling process? Has bifurcation been less successful than the GSEs had hoped? What do you think, Julie?
Is that for me?
It goes to the lady.
Well, I think, so Tim, you bring up a good point, and I think it's great to clarify that. There are no brakes on bifurcation.
Oh!
I do think that you'll see a formal announcement about that probably in February.
Oh!
But the bifurcated process is still alive and well. The GSEs and FHFA in particular, they are very interested in seeing the results of that. And so of those test and learns and those pilots. And so
they want to see the results
part of that
of the bifurcation
is time savings, and we could go through that. And then also protecting appraiser independence. And then again, with the use of technology, how we can give in that bifurcated process, how we can bridge the gap of knowledge for that PDC, and then also offer more insight into the collateral.
So it sounds like to me that the bifurcation and that the pilot programs over at Fannie and Freddie, at least over at Fannie, are full steam ahead. They are not slowing down in today's world, and that's coming straight out of somebody that's fully connected in to Fannie Mae.
Apparently there's going to be an update in February.
The update in February is coming. Kevin, that gives them what? About 30 days to properly doctor the numbers? I mean, to give us the appropriate data set to see how the bifurcation and modernization technique takes place. We've been discussing this for a very long time on this show. We had a show called The Dystopian Nightmare. Do you remember that one? The dystopian nightmare where we talked about everybody being brought on as staff appraisers, and you're just going to sit behind the desk all day long, pump out about 8 to 10 reports, and you're just going to have a job. You're not going to have a profession. You're going to have a job. We call that the dystopian nightmare. There's also a show called Phil Welcomes 5,000 New Appraisers. Where's the 5,000 appraisers coming from? Over here, into the bifurcation world where you just have a job. It is going to be a very command and control type of business, where that banking work becomes very command and control. It's very Orwellian when it comes to the collateral analysis of the country inside of that portfolio. That is one form of modernization. So that's one path. The bifurcating lady of class have shown us one path of modernization. So let's see what George Dell has to say. Remember, this is all about risk in the secondary market. Appraisers are there to answer questions about risk. That's the most important thing. So George Dell brought up the situation, along with the Burly Kentuckian, about risk. Let's listen to what they have to say.
It's all about risk. And George, is your statement and the comments from these folks, are you predicting that with this type of use, it's going to encourage another housing crisis?
The bifurcation, he means.
I think so. I'm old enough that I've been through, I think, 4 of them now. They happen about every 10 or 12 years.
We're due.
Pretty regularly. Each one has a different flavor and a different taste.
Bifurcated taste this time.
But I'm having a little trouble here because my whole mission is to help prevent the next economic meltdown. And how I draw the lines on a house drawing is not going to change the world. In fact, that technology, like Julie says, absolutely is coming. So the data collection part through that type of technology is going to get stronger and better and easier. I think one of the problems with our profession is that we're focused on the wrong thing. As I mentioned, we're trying to give an opinion of value, which was what USPAP requires us to do. We have to be credible. And if you think about what the definition of credible is, it's worthiness, worthy of belief. So my job as an appraiser is to be believable. And I sometimes think, well, gee, a good qualification for that is be a good used car salesman. That's part of the problem. And because of the historical nature of where valuation came from the 1930s, which basically we were born out of the 1930s depression.
May have another one coming too, George.
The problem is we're still focused on property analysis, and what appraisers need to be focused on is market analysis. We're still thinking about 3 comps or 6 comps and then doing our market analysis. And I think that's backwards. We need to be focused on markets.
Yes.
And from that, identifying what economists call prediction, predicting the hypothetical value of a sale as of a given date. That comes from market information, not from whether the line was drawn correctly.
Market analysis.
Part of the subject property. Sure, that's important. I don't want to underestimate that. But our focus continues to be on individual properties when we need to be focused on, we are market analysts.
Market analyst, yes, George Dell. Yes, 100% accurate, 100% correct. Market analytics. Now, he also brings up another word, too, predictions, things like that. I'm going to get into that in just a minute because that's a hole in USPAP that needs to be fixed immediately when it comes to predictors. So what George Dell is talking about is modernizing the appraisal profession into market analyst, almost, in my personal opinion, economic anthropologist, than just this Orwellian command and control modernization that you're getting from the banking system. So you have 2 different paths. You have the Orwellian modernization path, or you have the George Dellian modernization path. Are you an Orwellian? Is that what you want to do in your life? Sit behind a desk all day long, pump out 8 reports all day long in your job? That's your Orwellian modernization path. Or you can take the path of the George Dellian. I am a George Dellian real estate appraiser. I'm an Austrian economic thinker, and I am a George Dellian appraiser. From this point on, you can always ask people, are you an Orwellian or are you a George Dellian? And George Dellianism creates certain things. It creates ingenuity. It creates new programs. It creates new algorithms. It creates new formulas. It creates and produces innovation. George Dellianism appraisal practice brings on innovation. It is a totally different form of modernization than the stuff that we're getting over there in the secondary market. And George Dell is right. There's going to be a lot more data out there available when it comes to all the residential properties across the country. More and more data will be available. How you analyze that data, however, will be very important. And from the analysis of that data comes the George DeLeon appraiser. It's your choice. It's a choice that you want to go down. I will be quite frank with you and be honest with you. I prefer the George DeLeon work because the George DeLeon work is more aggressive. It's more rewarding. It's harder. It takes a little bit more time. But at the end of the day, it's your profession. It's not the technician job that the secondary market is coming up with. So 2 different paths of modernization. Your choice. Do you want George Orwell or do you want George Dell? It's up to you. I will become a George DeLeon. Now, when it comes to George DeLeon appraisal, turning myself into one of those, we have a little problem with USPAP. Actually, it's not a little problem. We got a big problem with USPAP. One that could actually bring a lawsuit not only to state boards and not only to individual board members, not as they represent themselves on the board, but also them personally, and also can bring a big, big, big fat lawsuit to the door of the Appraisal Foundation. So listen to this really quick now. We have 2 forms of modernization, Orwellian, George DeLeon. If I start to do more and more George DeLeon work, I may come up with certain formulas that I use to derive opinions. I may even come up with some predictors, Kevin. Predictors that predict certain market activity maybe 3 months, 6 months, 12 months into the future. When I was at the American Enterprise Institute, do you know how many market makers I ran into? There's a ton of market makers out there. They really want to know what your predictors look like. Now, if I've got a predictor that I've come up with because I'm a George DeLeon, do I want to have anybody else getting that information? No. See, that makes me money. That's mine. That's my intellectual property. That's my proprietary data. I don't want to share that with my competitors, and I don't want to share it with my peers. But here's the problem. This is when the Burly Kentuckian Brian Reynolds makes the money call. He says something during this webinar that just kind of glides over, and it's basically the biggest hole in USPAP that's out there today if we're going to go down the George Wellian path. Kevin, play the soundbite.
You got to remember, USPAP only has 2 requirements for scope of work, and that's, does everybody do it, and is this what your clients want?
Yeah.
What
your peers do.
Here it is.
I think that's one thing we ought to change at USPAP. Don't you teach your children now? Don't do that just because everybody else is doing it. Don't give in to peer pressure. But yet now we're saying give in to peer pressure.
Give in to peer pressure. Play that one more time at the very beginning, just where George says it.
You got to remember, USPAP only has 2 requirements for scope of work, and that's, does everybody do it, and is this what your clients were?
Yeah.
Does everybody do it, and does your client want? Does everybody do it, and does that what your client wants? Does everybody do it? Does everybody do it? Does everybody do it? That means that you've got to share your data to make sure that you back yourself up to prove that everybody does it. Well, what if I'm doing something a certain way because I'm innovating and USPAP is in my way because I'm not going to share it? I'm not going to share it. This is where abuses can happen on state boards all day long. You can get a bunch of competitors out there together that says, hey, you know what? So-and-so down the street who's our competitor, he's got this client, this client, this client, and this client. He's got a way of doing things. We have 2 options. We take him up to the state board, so he opens it up, and he brings out his Coca-Cola secret sauce that he's got, that he's developed, that he's making money off of. We want to see that, and if we can't see it, and if he refuses to give it to us because we need to prove that everybody does it, then guess what? We'll just suspend his license for a year or 2 years, kick him out of the marketplace. Man, if that was me and I had a secret sauce and I had a couple secret formulas to Coca-Cola in my appraisal toolbox, I'm not going to share that. I'm not going to share that with any board member that's a competitor of mine. I'm not going to share any of that. That's my intellectual data. So a competitor can come in and say, basically, bottom line, hey, look, guess what? We don't do it that way. And because we don't do it that way, and this guy is innovating and he's perhaps found a better way to do it, then he's out of here and he's out of the marketplace. Terrible abuse can happen. That's where regulatory reform needs to come in. Now think about this. What if you're the appraiser that has the secret sauce that the client loves it. Maybe the client is a market maker. Maybe the client is using your predictor, paying you tons of money to do that. And by the way, predictors, they're worth tons of money if they're accurate. Big time money if they're accurate. What if you lose your license as an appraiser? You got all kind of options here. I sue the board. I sue the board members. I bring on an antitrust suit just as similar as Coaster did to Virginia. I bring on one of those, no problem at all. I sue for damages. I sue for that. I sue the Appraisal Foundation for up USPAP, so that way that they haven't corrected that issue, so it doesn't word it right. So therefore, Uniform Standards Professional Appraisal Practice has made me lose my job. Seriously, there could be some major problems. He brings up a phenomenal point because this is the two forms of modernization. The foundation has been focused in on the secondary market, the big banking side of modernization. Can USPAP fall in line with and work with the modernization in the banking system? And some people will agree and some people will disagree. Some people say that the bifurcating is not USPAP compliant. Some people says it will. Trust me one thing, folks. If there's a liquidity crisis in the banking system, USPAP is out the door. Don't worry about it. But the foundation has been concentrated on that modernization track, but not the George DeLeon modernization track. The George DeLeon modernization track requires some proprietary information that I'm not going to share with any of my peers, and I'm not going to share with any of my competitors. It's my secret sauce. It makes me money, and I'm not going to share it. Just this last month, I took on a very interesting assignment, a very niche market, something that I got familiar with, and it actually took me about 2 months to get familiar with this type of property. And as far as I could tell, there was only a few other appraisers in the entire country that handles this sort of niche market. And I called one of them, and we had a terrific conversation. That's not President Trump. It was a perfect conversation. That's what it was. It was a perfect conversation.
It was a perfect phone call.
A perfect phone call. It was perfect. I had a great conversation. But anyways, I had a nice conversation, and we talked about this property type in this niche market. Now, this appraiser has a Coca-Cola formula. Did he share it with me? Hell no. Why would he? I think he would be an idiot if he did. So as I went on vacation and as I was on the beach, and my wife always gets a little mad at me because I get on the beach and I relax for like one day, and then I get my notebook out and I start making notes and stuff like that on the second day, right? So I start to work on the formula, start to work the different patterns. I finally came up with something that I think is extremely credible. Am I going to share it? Hell no. Hell no. That's my proprietary information. I am a George DeLeon appraiser. That modernization, that formula, data analytical, economic, anthropological modernization that's going to take place on the other side of this whole thing, that's where we need to have some protection. And USPAP has got problems if you require that the only thing you have to do is make sure everybody does it and make sure your client's happy with it. So there needs to be some changes. See, this is why I wish Pat Turner was on the Appraisal Standards Board, because I can just call it Pat. I'll be like, Pat, I think we have an issue here with USPAP. What can we do about it? And Pat be like, don't worry about it, Crawford. I'll take care of it right now, Crawford. I got it under control. But we don't have that. So I highly recommend some of you that are out there that are USPAP experts, other than myself, because I'm not as big of an expert as, say, Brian Reynolds, who brings up a phenomenal point. I would start hammering the foundation on it, holding their feet to the fire on that, because I'm going to modernize. I'm modernizing in a totally different direction. I'm a George DeLeon, and I believe in George DeLeonism, and I will modernize in that way. Therefore, I need to have some protections when it comes to my intellectual data. I think USPAP has got some major problems, and I'm very happy that Brian Reynolds, he looks smarter with the beard, don't you think?
Yeah.
I think he does. I think he's burly, but he looks smarter with the beard. He brought up a phenomenal point, and I think that needs to flow through everybody else. So really start to think about that as we start to now move ourselves into this different modernization path where we start to take on more estate work. And there's going to be a lot of people dying. So we're going to take on estate work because of the baby boomers. And there's going to be a lot of people getting divorces because, especially if there's an economic collapse, there's going to be a lot of people getting a divorce. We're going to be doing that. We have to go down different paths. We're going to be more into homeowner consultation, investor consultation. These are the things that we need to modernize into, and we do need to have some movement in USPAP. Maybe the Appraisal Institute can even get involved. Jeff Sherman is now the president of the Appraisal Institute, and I've met Jeff. I've met him several times. I think he's a very nice guy. Mr. Sherman, El Presidente Sherman, it's time for you to get out there, make a difference when it comes to the George DeLeonism that will be arriving in the 21st century. Folks, you've already had your data stolen. Your data has been stolen by some big corporations out there. Do you want your formulas stolen? Do you want your algorithms stolen? Do you want your secret sauces, your Coca-Cola recipes, Do you want those stolen by competitors on a state board that drive you up there to put you into a rock and a hard place where it's either give me your secret source, give me your secret formula, or we take your license away and we destroy your business for an entire year? Is that what you want? Appraisal Foundation, get a hold of that. Get a hold of that really, really fast, because that's going to be a problem in the not-so-distant future. Two different paths of modernization in 2020. You can go the Orwellian path, or you can go the George DeLeon path, and I will always pick the George DeLeon side. George DeLeonism is a better way of practicing the appraisal profession. So that's about it. Kevin, you have anything you want to add?
Nope.
Not at all? We're
Nope.
back, buddy.
We're back.
We're back. Stir it up a little bit. Just stirring it up just a little bit. But I'll tell you one thing, though. The foundation does have to address that issue and have to address it really quick, because as we start to create more and more different formulas for ourselves and innovate, we have to be protected on a lot of different levels, and that'll keep the foundation and everybody that's on the boards and everything out of trouble. All right? So, ladies and gentlemen, we have come to the end of our show for this month, and as always, I would like to thank you for listening as we journey through the mysteries and complexities that are, in fact, the real estate appraisal profession. I would like to thank my producer, Kevin Kinney, for thoughtful insights and knowledge. God willing, we'll be back here very soon, continuing to report from the front lines of the real estate market. In the meantime, you kiss your spouse, you hug your children, enjoy your day, be safe in the field. You've been listening to Phil Crawford on Voice of Appraisal. We'll talk very soon.